This is the seventh year that we're publishing this report, and it's the fourth year we've done that together with CPI, and the first time we've done it also with the advocacy team. So we're delighted to be partnering with those great organizations to deliver this report to you. So this State of Global Air Quality Funding remains the only global analysis of air quality financing. And very much the idea is to have a set of data that leads to a set of recommendations for action. So we very much hope that this report is a tool for advocacy and action. And just as a reminder of why we need to fund air quality action, air quality is the second biggest risk factor for death worldwide. It results in over 8 million deaths a year. And poor air quality, we know, is slowing equitable growth. It's eroding the gains made by international development funding in other areas. And the World Bank has estimated that the economic costs of air pollution amount to between 4.7% and 6.5% of gross domestic product. So it's a huge cost. And of course, these damages are not felt equally. 9 out of 10 air pollution deaths happen in low and middle income countries. So just about the report. The report focuses on international development funding of projects relating to outdoor air quality from 5 years, from 2019 to 2023, and that's the period for which the most recent data is available. And it also includes qualitative insights, which we've derived from interviews that we did with experts in air quality, climate finance, and international development. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with some short presentations from the folks who produced the report. And they will present for around about sort of 15 to 20 minutes. And then I'm delighted that we'll be joined by a distinguished panel of speakers. We've got Dr. Patrick Booker, we've got Dr. Genevieve Connors, we've got Mr. Toro Kobu, and we've got Dr. Patience Gwazi from South Africa, who will be our panelists today, and I will introduce them shortly. And then we will be taking, so after some questions to the panel, then we will be taking questions from the audience. So I hope we can have good interactive discussion around the challenges of driving more funding into air quality action. So our speakers, first of all, Dr. Patrick Booker. He's the Air Quality Lead Planning Officer in the Sectoral Department at the headquarters of the German Development Agency, GIZ. And Dr. Genevieve Connors is the Acting Global Director for Environment Department at the World Bank. And Mr. Toro Kobu is the Senior Director for Climate Change, Resilience and Environment in ADB's Climate Change and Sustainable Development Department. And Dr. Patience Gwazi is the Chief Director of Air Quality Management at the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment in South Africa. And congratulations and appreciation to Dr. Patience and everyone in the team at the South African Ministry of the Environment for negotiating the very first G20 declaration on air quality just 2 weeks ago. And that's a landmark statement and a positive sign of intent at a time of more gloomy news generally on climate and international issues. So great, that's great news. So let's dive into the presentations. We will start with a short presentation of the key findings from the report by Sasha Abraham, who is a senior analyst at the Climate Policy Initiative, our key partner on this project. And then we'll have a review of the recommendations that the report produced from Rachel Dungate, who's a senior analyst at the Clean Air Fund. So let's get started. I'll mute myself and I'll pass over to Sasha now to take us through the highlights of the report.
Thanks so much, Sean. So yes, I'm Sasha Abraham from CPI. If we could go to the next slide, please. Perfect. So I'd like to start off by acknowledging that this report obviously comes at a time of great change and uncertainty in the development finance world. So as Sean said, our report only covers the data years up to 2023, but seismic shifts have happened since then, and we've tried to consider those throughout the report. We've seen cuts announced from multiple major donors, and some critical institutions, such as USAID, have been removed entirely from the landscape. We cannot say for sure yet what the precise quantitative impacts of those changes will be, as there are lots of other moving parts and funding institutions that make up the overall total. However, it's undeniable that there'll be a serious squeeze across all development funding areas after these changes, and that will affect air quality. It's going to be harder for development funding for air quality to increase in the way that the world urgently needs to do. So it's very important to keep up pressure and attention on the importance and the changes in air quality funding. Next slide, please. Before we dive into the analytical findings in full, I think it's worth looking at the definitions that we use throughout this report. So just to note, all of the funding categories examined here come under international development financing. So all the flows that we look at are from institutions like MDBs, bilateral DFIs, national governments. Within that, we then have a funding category of total air quality funding, which is one of the main metrics we look at, and it measures the overall pot of international development finance that contributes to tackling ambient air pollution. That's the yellow and orange circle on the chart that you can see here. It's made up of two components. Firstly, outdoor air quality funding, which looks at projects that explicitly set out to address air quality improvements. That's the yellow wedge. And secondly, funding with air quality co-benefits for projects that achieve outdoor air quality improvements without explicitly setting out to do so, but by virtue of the sectoral solution they're funding. That's the orange bit of the circle. We also look at the subset of international development funding that goes towards prolonging the use of fossil fuels, either by financing fossil fuel assets directly or by supporting the industries that involve heavy fossil fuel use. And that's the grey circle in the middle. If we can go to the next slide, we can start to look at some of the key analytical findings. So could we move to the next slide, please? Perfect, thank you. So we're going to start with outdoor air quality funding, which, as a reminder, covers the projects that are explicitly targeting air quality improvements. This is really important because when you explicitly target, monitor, and design programs around specific development objectives, evidence shows you're more likely to achieve those objectives, which is why this funding category is such an important one for us to consider on the air quality front. Looking more closely at the numbers, we can see that from 2019 to 2023, less than 1% of international development finance was allocated to outdoor air quality funding. This is striking, given the well-documented impacts of poor air quality, that the funding percentage is so low. And we know the economic benefits of addressing this, and we're still seeing very little funding explicitly targeting this development outcome. Even worse, this small pot of funding isn't necessarily seeing consistent growth year on year. While there was some growth from 2020 to 21, 22, we've seen that there was a fall of 20% from $4.7 billion in 2022 to $3.7 billion in 2023. This is a concerning drop. Though we see some year-on-year changes that can be skewed by individual large projects, we do need to see a consistent growth in outdoor air quality funding and growth at a faster rate than we have seen in previous years. Put simply, the data highlights a critical funding gap that urgently needs to be addressed to avoid some of the harms that we know are associated with outdoor air pollution. If we go to the next slide, please. We can start to look at total air quality funding, which is the sum of outdoor air quality funding and funding with air quality co-benefits. Here, we see a slightly improved picture, though there are still many gaps. Once you include the projects that have implicit air quality co-benefits, total air quality funding makes up around 6% of international development funding from 2019 to 2023. This is better than 1%, obviously, but we still could see a greater percentage than 6%, given how many projects in the development space do have air quality co-benefits that could be being funded. The 5-year funding total has increased 7% on the figure from last year, and we have seen some year-on-year growth the past 3 years in a row. This is positive. However, we do also see that growth is starting to plateau, which is concerning given the increased constraints on funding that we mentioned at the start. We can see here that the funding growth is really being driven by funding with air quality co-benefits, which is shown in the orange in the column chart on the right. I think the key takeaway from these slides are that while there are some small amounts of growth on the total air quality funding, we have seen year-on-year growth for a few years in a row. It's really important that as these constraints come in, the funding cuts start to bite, the increased pressures on lots of different funders really come into play, that total air quality funding still continues to grow and address the devastating impacts of air pollution. And while all of this air quality funding is very positive, it's also important that it does explicitly target air quality improvements wherever possible, to give these measures the best chance of success. Next slide, please. And the next slide again. Thank you. Moving on now to where this air quality funding is going. So for those of you that have read SOGAF reports in previous years, the funding remains very concentrated, both at the country level and at the region level, which is a finding that we've had in previous years too. For example, this year, we find that the majority of funding goes to Asia, which is held from previous years, and that the Philippines, Bangladesh, and China receive 2/3 of all outdoor air quality funding across the world between 2019 and 2023. While it's definitely positive that these countries are receiving this funding and they should be funded for outdoor air quality improvements, it's worrying that there are other regions that are totally underserved and then left at risk. In particular, we see that sub-Saharan Africa has seen significant drops in funding, with outdoor air quality funding for this sub-region declining by 91% from 2022 to 2023. Next slide, please. The regional disparities in funding, which we've just talked about, are even more concerning once we start to look at the levels of pollution in some of these underserved countries, which holds even when we're looking at population size, controlling population size. We can see here that 7 out of the 10 world's most polluted countries are receiving less than $1 per person in total air quality funding in 2023, which is, whichever metric you use, that is low. And even though we don't have a quantitative number of the amount they should receive, it's very firm that $1 per person is clearly not touching the sides. The impacts from air pollution that we're seeing in these countries are severe. I think this finding is particularly notable because many of the countries that are receiving less than $1 per day, for less than $1 per year, for example, are low-income nations that are less likely to have the fiscal space that is needed to take adequate domestic action on air pollution, which means that this international development funding that we're talking about is an even greater need in these countries and in some places across the region. Next slide, please. And next slide again. Starting to look at who is funding air quality, we see that the top 10 list of donors, which we produce in the SOGAF reports, is remaining relatively stable over time, particularly towards the top of that donor list. So we've seen some changes, such as JICA overtaking ADB, Asian Development Bank, from their previous position in second place to get to the top place. This was after JICA increased their funding to the point where they are making up 1/3 of the global total in 2023. We see a mix of institutions in this top 10 with MDBs, bilateral DFIs, Exim banks, and multilateral climate funds all present within the top 10. And it's fantastic that some of these top donors are remaining there. They're continuing to fund year after year, but I think we'd say there's always room for more healthy competition and, new entrants shooting up the leaderboard. I think there are lots of funders that are contributing to total air quality funding, but there's definitely room for some donors to increase their contributions further. Next slide, please. And I think it's another double skip. Perfect, thank you. Finally, we come to our fossil fuel prolonging funding, which is sadly moving in entirely the wrong direction. So after a promising downturn in 2021, fossil fuel funding was once again higher than outdoor air quality funding in 2022 and 2023, as shown by the green bar on the column chart on the right. This is in itself a very sobering finding. With the harms of air pollution so well documented, it is almost unbelievable that international development funders are still putting more funding into fossil fuel projects that make that problem worse than into the projects which are explicitly trying to make the problem better. When we saw outdoor air quality funding decline in 2023, as I mentioned earlier, we saw fossil fuel prolonging funding increase by 80%. And as funding is squeezed further in current years with the aid cuts, increased pressures on donors, this category of funding should not be prioritised over the critical measures that we need to address air pollution and capture the vast benefits we know are there across health, growth, and the environment. With that, I'll pass over to Rachel, who can take you through some of the recommendations that were in the SOGAF report this year.
Thank you, Sasha. That was very informative and really, really in depth, and I think gives us a good factual basis from which we can continue this conversation. So now I'm going to pass to my colleague Rachel, who's going to take us through some of the recommendations that the Cleaner Fund has put forward on the basis of this factual information that we have in front of us. So over to you.
Thanks, Sean. Hopefully everyone can hear me. Sorry, we've got a bit of echo. There we go. Thank you. Yeah, thanks so much, Sasha. So we have a few different recommendations for development funders to be able to strengthen their action on air quality that I'd like to talk you through today. So if we go to the next slide. And of course, you can find plenty more detail on all of these in the report. So the first is for funders to integrate clean air as an explicit co-benefit across development and climate projects. So during this time of greatly constrained development funding budgets, which we've acknowledged, this is crucial in order to both unlock more air quality funding, but crucially to make what development funding there is have more impact. So by including air quality as a visible and explicit co-benefit within project design and implementation, we can maximise the overall gains from climate and development focused projects, whilst ensuring that benefits in one sphere don't come at the cost of another. So the second is for air quality to be made an institutional and staff priority. In doing so, this helps to unlock greater funding through increased internal engagement and awareness, and supports the first recommendation I mentioned. We've already seen how organisations like Asian Development Bank have started to do this, and how this is reflected in the amount of air quality funding coming through from them. And we're looking forward to hearing a bit more about that later in the panel discussion. To help organisations with this at Clean Air Fund, we've supported the development of an air quality toolkit for DFIs to help upskill their staff in this area, and have recently run the first training around this with further webinars and training planned for this year and next year. My colleague Mathilde will share a link to this toolkit in the chat. And please do get in touch if you're interested in learning more or having some training within your organisation. Thirdly, it's clear from the report's findings that air quality investment is still heavily focused in a handful of countries. So it's important that development funders look to target investments towards funding deserts, especially in Africa. So looking at the regional and country allocations of institutions' funding and the availability of concessional finance will help funders understand where the gaps are to ensure those with the highest pollution burden are getting sufficient funding and in a viable format. And with the emergence of the Africa Clean Air Plan, it's clear that there is momentum that could be supported through funding. Our fourth recommendation is for funders to strengthen cross-donor engagements and collaborate on the way air quality funding is tracked. So cross-donor collaboration is key for effective air quality management in order to share learnings, developing new solutions, and making sure air quality is visible and doesn't slip through the cracks. So funders can ensure effective cross-donor communication, for example, through regional and global forums. They can take a cross-sectoral and airshed approach tackling air pollution. We need to acknowledge that air pollution operates beyond country borders and not with our administrative confines, and in order to ensure funding is used effectively, and deciding which airsheds to target and then dividing roles between funders can be an effective way to collaborate. We also need effective tracking and reporting on air quality funding to ensure it's actually used efficiently, to avoid duplication and make it easy to see the gaps in the funding landscape. So a vital step to achieving this is to standardise reporting and tracking across donors, such as through working with the OECD DAC. And currently there's no specific OECD DAC code or marker related to air quality, which makes funding difficult to track, and that reduces incentive for funding to actually be allocated to it. So we'd welcome funders supporting efforts to work with the OECD to improve and expand the mechanisms for tracking in a way such as that. Fifth, we'd like funders to prioritise efforts to reduce emissions of black carbon, a critical super pollutant. So only a few funders, you can find out more about this in the report, but only a few funders are investing in projects that explicitly target black carbon emissions. But consciously addressing this pollutant is a really efficient way to improve climate and health, given its role in warming, sensitive climates like the Arctic and Himalayas, and its health burden. And to prioritise black carbon funding, we recommend funders, as mentioned, integrate it into project design, like with air quality, increase awareness and understanding of the health and climate impacts of black carbon, and highlighting the driving sectors. So, for example, in kind of Asia and Africa, residential fuels are a key driver, and diesel engines in Europe and North America. Look for opportunities to increase the funding, particularly in the high potential sectors like energy and transport, and being able to better showcase the economic value of black carbon reduction to increase investment. So just two more. Sixth recommendation is to catalyse private sector participation in air quality projects. So though this report focuses on development finance specifically, bringing in more private finance to air quality projects has a lot of potential, and funders can play a role in attracting that private sector investment, primarily by encouraging countries to implement reforms and develop initiatives that unlock private capital, supporting the setup of robust air quality projects, which are kind of low risk and can attract investment, using concessional instruments like guarantees and first loss finance to de-risk that kind of blended financing, and supporting the development of best buy air quality approaches that signal where investments could be most effective across the different air quality projects. And finally, fundamentally, we need funders to prioritise phasing out fossil fuel funding as soon as possible in recognition of their profoundly damaging impacts on air pollution as well as climate change. And as part of this, funders should look to publish roadmaps showing how commitments to how phasing out will be achieved, making a just transition a central pillar of funding commitments and investments, recognising this is needed for economic development and climate protection in tandem, particularly for the most vulnerable communities, prioritising climate positive development and showing how the success of this showing how this is evidence that fossil fuels need not be the default engine of economic development, let's say. Redirecting fossil fuel subsidies, and finally ensuring transparency and clear reasoning for where fossil fuel prolonging investments do need to be taken forward. Thank you very much. I'll pass back over to Sean.
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you, Sasha, both so much for those concise presentations of the facts and the recommendations that stem from them. So now we're going to turn to our panelists. So we're going to get a conversation going. I would encourage anyone who's got any questions about the presentations to put your questions in the Q&A box. As I say, we're going to come to questions from the audience in the last part of the webinar, which is going on to 1/4 past the hour. So we should have time. So I'll move on to the panelists now. I'll try to keep the questions tight, and I'm sure the panelists will keep their answers to 3 or 4 minutes so that we can pack in as much as we can. So I'm going to start by coming to you first, Genevieve. Good morning from Washington, I believe, and thank you for joining us today. So your team at the World Bank released a fantastic report earlier this year called Accelerating Access to Clean Air for a Livable Planet. And there was one stat in there which we found really interesting, which was the prediction you made that integrated policy approaches. So we've got a little bit of an alarm going on in here. So we are cursed. So I'm going to pass to my colleague Rosie to see whether this alarm in this building goes off.
Hi everyone. Sorry, I just stepped away for a moment myself then as well. So I think Genevieve, if we can pass to you for that first question that Sean was just running through with you, that would be great.
Okay, sure, no problem.
Thank you.
We can do this. And I'm very sorry for your alarm. That's very frustrating. Let me paraphrase the question again, just to sort of segue into it. And so there was what Sean was saying was that we've recently released this report on accelerating access to clean air, and showing that we could unlock trillions in finance over time, primarily by focusing, for example, on the integration of climate policies alongside air quality improvement investments. And the needs, of course, are in the trillions. I did want to talk a little bit about how we in the World Bank Group go about integrating our air quality investments and our air quality approaches into our broader environmental and climate engagement. I think it's an interesting time because in the World Bank Group, but certainly also in other agencies, you mentioned the decline in direct foreign aid, a kind of changing environment that we're living in. But also we're seeing a real coming together of push for what I would say targets from the top with an organization that is and continues to be country responsive and therefore demand led. So what do I mean by that? So at the World Bank, for example, at the moment, we have large targets around energy access. We have large corporate targets around a host of healthcare, and a real focus on people and jobs. And it's harder sometimes, I want to be honest in this conversation, for us to really bring air quality to the forefront and make it a centerpiece of the agenda. And so some of the things we do are hook it onto other strategies. And another thing we do is focus on the co-benefits, which was something that was discussed earlier. So we don't have an independent air quality strategy. We have this flagship report that was produced, but we do have a climate change action plan, which is still in effect for us as a World Bank Group. And air quality is embedded throughout that. It's embedded on systems transitions in cities. It's embedded in systems transitions in transport. It's embedded in systems transitions in the energy sector and all the areas in which we need to advance work in order to achieve a low carbon future and support mitigation. These are areas where, of course, investments in reducing pollution at source will have a major impact on air quality. And so that's sort of one of the hooks on which we hang the air pollution hat. But the other is in this idea of co-benefit. So we have large programs in transport, we have large programs in energy, renewable energy. Of course, we pursue Paris alignment so that all our investments are in line with the objectives of the Paris Agreement. These are all other areas in which we see a growing portfolio. So our standalone air quality projects are not necessarily growing, but components embedded across multiple other sectors is where we're really seeing the future and the growth. Maybe a last point, if you go to the World Bank website, we have a fantastic scorecard website. Over the last few years, we've gone from having over 100 indicators to really, really focusing to show results as a bank. We used to joke that the World Bank has the balance sheet of a Lehman Brothers, but we have the results of a small NGO. And so how do we do a better job of aggregating? Well, one of the ways we do that is sort of more systematic measurement of our results, but also having fewer indicators so that we can tell a good story. And I'm making this point because if you go to our really good, fantastic interactive website, you will not see air quality anywhere in our 22 results indicators, which makes it hard for us inside the organization to really advocate and push for funding for air quality. However, it is an outcome measurement. We do measure it for our client countries, and this is one of the ways in which we can try and make the case to our country programs that air quality is worth investing in addition, of course, to supporting the demand that's coming from countries. I'll stop there and hope you guys have found your feet and with the alarm. Over to you, Rosie.
Thank you very much, and thanks very much, everyone, for your patience. I believe my other colleagues have had to evacuate the building they were in, but I fortunately am working from home today, so I was feeling ill and unwell, so I will take over from here. So thank you very much, Genevieve, and it's really fascinating to hear you in particular talk about those the results, and that's one of the things you were definitely talking about in terms of the report recommendations that in order to help drive this investment in, being able to see those results and have those in the metrics and frameworks is hugely important, as you've said yourself. So I think the fact that that's coming through at the country level is really important. So the next question goes over to Mr. Toru from the Asia Development Bank. Thank you for joining us today. So the ADB shows up in this State of Global Air Quality Funding Report as a leading donor, for which you have our congratulations. And I know you've also recently launched an ambitious air quality technical assistance program. So I'm interested to know, what is the ADB doing to ensure its staff are able to deliver on the organisation's air quality commitments?
Yeah, hello, Rosie. Thank you for having me, first of all. I hope you can hear me. I just dropped off I'm dialing in from a hotel, so my connection is a bit shaky. So
We can hear you
but we
well,
can do
thank
this,
you. Yeah,
as
between us all, we'll get through these
Genevieve said.
technical challenges. Yeah.
Hello? Yeah, yeah,
Yes.
exactly. Um, uh, yeah, so thank you for that question. I think I can keep my intervention short because I agree to a lot of the things that Genevieve just said. So we're very much facing, we're sister organizations, and the most important thing is the country ownership, and it's to make sure that programs focus priorities are demand driven. What we do is a little bit of a hybrid approach. As you heard already on the World Bank example, we work in ADB in many sectors that have very important, significant implications on air quality. And those are transport, those are urban, those are agriculture, and of course, cross-cutting is climate change and power production, as mentioned earlier, covered in the report. And many of those have contributions to air quality improvements. However, the thematic focus on that by the countries and those who decide on resource allocation priorities, that hasn't been there. We have seen that in China over the last 15 years or so, and they made it a real priority for the country. And ADB and World Bank joined to provide policy level financing and investment using financial intermediaries. So we have success cases, but we're now trying to really replicate that in other regions and countries. So, for example, Thailand, where Thailand has made air quality a thematic priority. So, how can we actually take the integrated approach that we already heard about and make sure that they're still achieving the core sector development priorities and challenges while maximizing or optimizing the improvement in air quality indicators? We're doing the same in Pakistan right now because we have, for example, agriculture investments to reduce residues or better use of residues. But now we are working and supporting the government on a air quality focused what's called a sector development program, and that's a combination of a policy intervention and a financial intermediary intervention for specific investments. And that really drives attention on maximizing the co-benefits on air quality. This requires both, which I say it's a push and pull on the demand side, but then we need the staff capacity to be able to nudge the demand side. Hello, can you still hear me?
Yes, we can still hear
Just
you.
checking. Okay. So on the institutional side, you already mentioned about the air quality toolkit. So this is very helpful and powerful. This is a first of a kind training kit for financiers. And we just ran the first training program together with the Clean Air Fund and Clean Air Asia. And we did it jointly between our institution's staff, so ADB staff, and the developing member country clients and key decision makers together. And by going through the key pollutants and the sources and looking at the attribution and what is the best approach to be able to address and provide better access to transport services or food security while reducing pollutants, the groups, again, together with staff and our clients in the developing countryside, we think about it together, and that has already led to harvest and interest from the developing countryside. So now we're going for follow-up missions to look into improving and strengthening the country program over the next 3 years for those countries that participated. Focusing on staff capacity and taking this cross-sectoral integrated approach and identifying co-benefits attribution is a massive effort that we have been continuing. There are several other things covered in the report. You mentioned 7 recommendations. Maybe I'll just touch on 2 more and then pause there. One is the coordination with the development partners. So we have been working with Clean Air Asia for a long time. In fact, it started from a technical assistance that we did in ADB together with the World Bank many years ago. But for example, in India, so earlier this year I was in India and our team discussed with the World Bank and IFC country office. And there we agreed that we collaborate and take a very focused approach to tackling the key polluting sectors and subsectors. So in other words, we do not take a scattered approach. So we bring the partners together and then decide who does what, and let's see real improvement in the pollutants and air quality indicators. So that's something that we are actually doing. And we are doing also on that in Pakistan, where the World Bank is supporting Punjab, and ADB, we're looking at Islamabad and some nationwide policies that we can support. Last thing is on fossil fuels. So here, I'm actually curious, maybe this is a question to the Clean Air Fund. We are going the other way. So we have something called Energy Transition Mechanism, which focuses on accelerating the retirement or repurposing of fossil fuel power plants. So these are coal-fired power plants, heavy fuel power plants, and to reduce that time span. So this is some financial engineering to make sure that for the sponsors of those power plants, the ends meet and they can run it for a shorter period and then accelerate the replacement with cleaner energy. So I'm not sure if that's already counted in the report, but that's a massive effort we're putting in. Let me pause there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Toru. And I can see that Sean has reappeared again. I think he's gone to another building down the road. So thank you very much for those comments. I will pass back to Sean now, but just to say before I do, it's really fascinating to hear the kind of all the different elements that you're putting in place at ADB to push that transition through.
Yeah, thank you, Rosie, and thank you for stepping in, even though you have a croaky voice and are dealing with an illness. And apologies for the for the fire alarm, which unexpectedly interrupted us at another location. But fortunately, we have access to this building, so I've come up here to resume the conversation with you. I'd now like to turn to Dr. Patience Gwazi. Dr. Patience, thank you very much for being with us today. It's fantastic to have you with us. And again, congratulations on the G20 Declaration on Air Quality. As I was saying at the beginning, that's really a bold step forward, and largely thanks to the leadership of your ministry and your minister. And one of the areas the declaration says the G20 should work on is financing. So I just wondered what your reflections are on the G20 discussions on the challenges of financing air quality action. Do you think there's now some momentum that can get behind some positive action by G20 countries on financing for air quality?
Thank you very much. I hope you can see me clearly. I'll switch off my video for the purpose of just having a clearer audio.
Yeah, we can see you and hear you very clearly. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The discussions within the G20 were quite interesting. And I think one of the issues that we picked up right from the beginning is the disparity of air pollution challenges between G20 and the rest of the Africa and Asian countries. And so after listening to the presentation just now from the Clean Air Fund around the funding resources, I have to acknowledge that the depth of the discussions within the G20 did not take into account some of the outcomes that have come from this engagement. And so while we have not necessarily put any commitments in terms of the support and financing through the technical paper that we've come up with, there is a commitment to recognize a number of areas that the G20 member states can participate in, albeit in kind, issues like capacity development, sharing and knowledging of expertise, particularly with air quality monitoring, with information management, and technology transfer. So I have to acknowledge that while finance was an issue that we put on the table as a G20, our outcome is to encourage existing interventions that are being put forward by the different financiers to support air quality challenges. And it will be interesting to see the work that we want to take forward as the G20, which is an annual technical workshop, where I think we might have the opportunity to go into a lot more detail on the components of not necessarily financing directly, but supporting the countries through in-kind support, such as capacity development, such as education and awareness raising and supporting policy development and implementation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Gwazi. Yes, and I would like to come back to you in the second round to sort of ask you what do you think we can maybe do with that technical workshop, and how do we keep the continuity going in the G20 space. But I want to turn now to Patrick Booker, who I remind you is the Environment and Climate Protection Planner for GIZ, the German Development Agency. And Patrick, thank you for joining us today. And GIZ is the lead agency for Germany's sort of technical cooperation. And I just wondered how you are going about embedding air quality into sectoral action to maximize impact. And maybe you could sort of run through some of the approaches and strategies that you're using to do that. So over to you, Patrick.
Yeah, many thanks for the question. Good afternoon and good morning as well from my side. Very good to have this discussion. So I should start by saying, so this is a slightly different, or we are in a slightly different position, as we are usually at the receiving end of funds. But I should stress that because of that dependency, right? So we can't often decide ourselves how to actually how to develop approaches or strategies, but we are dependent there often on the German ministries, from where we get the most or the main part of our funding. Having said that, it is quite clearly, I would say, well, during the last 2 or 3 years now, that there is a stronger focus as well from the German funding side, from the ministry side, on cross-sectoral approaches. And this is actually something we really appreciate, and this is something that is reflected in our approaches and strategies. So rather than focusing really on one sector, which we have done in the past a lot, for example, on the transport sector, we are now focusing much more on cross-sectoral approaches. I would say reflecting as well the challenges we see in our work. If you're thinking about sustainable urbanization, for example, decarbonization, circular economy, One Health, you need cross-sectoral approaches to actually tackle the air quality aspect related to these issues. And I think it would be important to stress that in the implementation of our projects, we hence are now looking very closely at bringing different disciplines, different departments, for example, of our partner countries together, and to really, in a joint effort, trying to tackle the air pollution problems they have. So if you, for example, think about sustainable urbanization, you need different policymakers from different departments to actually tackle this from both the energy, the transport, the building sector, for example. We set up as well for this purpose community of practices, usually bringing together different disciplines and different departments. And I should stress as well that the already mentioned co-benefits approach has been very, very successful, I would say, as well in our project. So we're really looking at stressing the benefits on the climate side, on the health, human health, environmental health side, and as well on the economic side, right? So, and by focusing on the co-benefits approach, I think it becomes quite clear why a cross-sectoral approach is even, it's much needed. And the last point I would probably like to make at this point is as well that often there are as well good business cases, right? So they might not be short-term, but definitely medium-term, where you can stress or where you can demonstrate quite clearly that investing into air quality measures within a wider co-benefits approach does give you some economic benefit down the line. And this is something, together with the co-benefits approach and the cross-sectoral approach, we as well see as rather central to our awareness raising and capacity building programs we run around the world. And I think I stop there. I have a few examples as well, but maybe we can come back to them later on. Thank you.
You, Patrick, that was indeed fascinating and really interesting to hear you talk about cross-sectoral approaches and sort of deriving the co-benefits, because that's really one of the central arguments that we make in our recommendations is that the return on investment looks much better when you actually account for co-benefits. And interesting that you've been able to derive some good business cases that have been convincing on the funding front. So somewhat sort of segueing from that, I'd like to go back to Genevieve. And Genevieve, apologies, I had to step away at the beginning when we were asking you the first question, but I'm glad that Rosie was able to pick up. And sort of linking back to sort of point that Patrick made around kind of business cases, in the flagship report, you write about the need to catalyze more private funding for air quality action. And I just wondered whether there were some things that you could enlighten us on with regard to what you think the MDBs can do to catalyze private finance, and whether there's any good examples that you can point to that the World Bank has been able to do, or that other institutions you've seen have been able to do.
Thank you, Sean, and no problem whatsoever. So this is like the $1 million question or the $1 trillion question, because well, you've just shown us what's happening with the state of air quality funding and the need to mobilize and catalyze the private sector. Maybe just a few reflections on what MDBs can do and what the World Bank has done. So maybe a first obvious point, but the World Bank is a World Bank group. We have a private sector arm, the IFC, that I don't represent today. We have a World Bank. We have that invests in the public sector, including in our most concessional, through our most concessional finance in our poorest countries, through IDA. And we have MIGA, the guarantee facility. And those three organizations, if you include IBRD and IDA separately, really work in lockstep to provide different solutions, but to the same clients for the same development objectives. And so what we're really trying to do in the years ahead as a World Bank group is also figure out how we can work together better, how one investment can unlock the other, how one engagement can unlock the other. So we bring sort of the full force of our offering to bear, rather than a tendency in the past, I'm caricaturizing, to work a little bit separately. And so I say that because one of the first things that we do as MDBs is actually provide the knowledge, the underlying knowledge that's necessary to unlock private sector investments. So we often go straight to the finance side when we think about the private sector, but to enable private sector, you need to de-risk the environment, not just to de-risk the investment. The second, of course, is the actual mobilization and unlocking of the flows of private finance. And there are many, many ways in which this works. Several have spoken about fossil fuels and the production of fossil fuels, whether that's in the energy industry and the move to renewables, whether that's in the transport sector and the move to electric vehicles and e-buses. What does the investment environment look like for enterprises, be they state-owned enterprises or local private sector or international private sector, to invest in those specific entities, projects, and so on. And I think that's a huge part of private sector investment. One of the things that we can offer as a World Bank group, again, this would be coming from MIGA, is this idea of de-risking those investments. Those investments are often safe after a few years, but those years in the beginning can be very difficult. So guarantees offer a way for us to engage in air pollution activities at the municipal level or at the national level in ways that otherwise we might not get private sector flow. And that's something that we can offer from the World Bank Group. But we can also work much more closely with national development banks in order to offer, for example, credit lines to manufacturers, to industry, who of course generate a large share. So an example that we have is in Turkey. In Turkey, we financed a roughly $400 million operation, which was exactly through a national development bank, so that the manufacturers of cement or other large industrial sectors could access a credit line in order to invest in the abatement or the pollution or emission reduction technologies needed in order to have air quality dividends. So those are some of the examples that I wanted to share. I don't think there is a one size fits all in terms of the private sector, but we do know that overall that it's going to have to be the lion's share of the funding going into improving air quality globally. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Genevieve, and thank you for the concrete example, which I think really helps to bring this to life. Because one of the questions I was sort of thinking of asking panelists was, what's your favorite air quality project that you've funded? And I know that the World Bank is proud of the Turkey one, which is one you've done recently. And it's great to hear you speak of some of the mechanisms that are available to de-risk, the guarantees, and the sort of policy and legislative work that you can do in advance of getting private sector engagement, or to clear the way for private sector engagement. And the examples of sort of electrification of public transport fleets is another good one, where again, sort of clearing the way to allow private sector capital to come in is a really rich instance. So I'm going to turn to Toru and sort of follow up on what you were saying earlier on, and very happy to sort of come back to you on the question of whether we've adequately captured the work you've done to shift away from fossil fuel sources to non-fossil fuel sources in the energy mix. We do track that, and it's interesting in the report. However, it is interesting in the report that not ADB, which has actually got a good record on this, but there are some other agencies which, on the one hand, are funding air quality work, on the other hand, they're also funding coal plants. So we're a bit bamboozled by that contradiction. But I wanted to come back to you and sort of ask you, sort of not just the sort of like your favorite project, but where do you see the opportunities to do more? I mean, you're already a kind of like a leading funder, but I think my understanding is you have ambitions to do more. So we'd love to hear, where you think you could expand your work.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. We have ambition to do more, and there's significant potential there. On your question, the favorite one and the most successful one is really the Beijing, Tianjin, Hebei programmatic approach, and that's where we supported with a policy-based program or result-based program. I won't go into details because that would the mechanics that will take time. It's all on our website. But 6 financial intermediary loans to provide support to local financial institutions, and 1 project specific loan. So that was over a 7-year period. And again, we like to say that the development partners support, but it's driven by government ownership or country ownership and the provincial ownership. So it's an airshed approach. We focus on that. There is potential to undertake such a long-term programmatic multi-sector approach in the Greater Mekong sub-region, for example, with Thailand and nearby countries. On the Indo-Gangetic airshed, World Bank has been putting in a lot of effort there, and we're discussing with the World Bank and other partners on how we can coordinate. I mentioned earlier. But then the very sort of entry point of that airshed is of course Pakistan, and we're really scaling up our support there. I do want to go back to private sector mobilization. This is a big focus that we have. This is one of the reasons that we look at policy-based instruments. We have several modalities for that because it's the enabling environment that is the most important. We have to shift private investment from activities that worsen pollution to those that improve air quality. And Genevieve and you, Sean, already talked about sort of public transport and e-buses. In Thailand, we supported through our private sector arm e-ferries. And because boats use the most polluting, the heavy fuel, and can we bring in private sector more for broader e-transport? So clean and clean in terms of clean energy, but also clean air. I saw one of the questions that already came up, which sectors are the most important? Well, there are many sectors that are important, but particularly for the Indo-Gangetic airshed, the agricultural residue burning. That is the one that is contributing most to the peak of each year when air quality is at its worst. So there is some traction on coming up with a return or financial mechanism so that it makes sense for farmers to not burn their residues. There are waste to energy operators who can come and pick up. That requires some public funding, but also the regulatory mechanism. So we can kick that mechanism in and make sense. Finally, just a food for thought for this community is we have seen success of payment for externalities. So we've had carbon markets, we've had renewable energy credits, energy efficiency credits, we've had payment for ecosystem services. Is it at all possible to look at something like payment for air quality services? Because as you mentioned, Sean, at the beginning and highlighted in the report, there are 8 million people killed from air quality, air pollution each year. Well, last year, 2024, from wars and conflicts, direct battle, there were 233,000 deaths, right? So air quality is a killing. I mean, this is ridiculous. So how can we really zoom in and help people focus on air quality and how the livelihoods are decreasing, worsening especially in the Asian cities? And can there be some kind of financial mechanism so that we can contribute to the people up in the airshed that contributes to downstream in the airshed?
I think those are great points. So thank you for raising them. And your emphasis on private sector mobilization, paying for externalities, and thank you also for answering one of the questions in the Q&A. So I think we're naturally segueing to the Q&A section. So what I think I will do is for the last 15 minutes is I'm just picking up the questions from the colleagues. And making sure that I answer them. There's a question I asked them. There's a question from Astrid Herrera, which I think I will ask Patience. Astrid asks, what strategies can be incorporated by advocates for cleaner air, especially in countries with social and economic inequalities in air quality measurement, to know which strategies are most efficient in improving air quality? So it's really a question about the role of evidence and data in driving funding. And how can sort of governments respond to sort of civil society's call for that? And I know, Patience, you've been trying to introduce more air quality sensors in South Africa, and I was wondering how well that's helping you to get a good view of the situation and allowing you then to take the right steps. Dr. Patience, I'm just waiting to see whether you you're still with us and are able to answer that question.
Am I audible now?
Yes, you are. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. I think this I'm going to answer in a generic form, not necessarily related to the G20 outcomes, even though we did focus on issues around information and access to information, particularly equality monitoring. One of the things that we are recognizing on the African continent is the cost of reference monitoring. Not only the cost in terms of investment, but the cost in terms of maintenance, technical capacity required, and also the expertise that is required, and noting that most of this equipment is internationally sourced. And so as a country, we are introducing low-cost sensor monitoring, and I have to take the appreciation of the support that we've received from the Clean Air Fund to establish a wide network of low-cost sensor monitors across the country. We do acknowledge the challenges with low-cost sensors, but we also acknowledge that in the absence of information, low-cost sensor monitors are giving us the ability to have some form of screening and understanding where the challenges are. And then we can then expand to reference monitoring where it's appropriate. But as a first step, it does provide us with information that we can use for decision-making up front. And I think that is one of the critical tools that we are presenting and we are implementing as a country. So around the province of Gauteng, which is the most populous province in the country, we have a project to introduce about 200 low-cost sensors, possibly by the end of this fiscal year, that will assist us in supporting those areas which we are identifying as hotspots, where we need to prioritize our interventions. And through that monitoring network, we'll be able to then track our interventions and understanding if our interventions, particularly those that are related to introducing tighter regulations, can be effectively monitored to support our work. In terms of the G20, we did make a recommendation to say, while we recognize that reference monitoring is significantly expensive, we also need to acknowledge that there are a whole suite of monitoring techniques that we should consider, and capacity being available. There is a lot of available data through regional modeling and satellite observations that can be downscaled to provide the first level of information that can be used for decision making. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Patience. That was very useful view from the ground of the challenges. And we've spoken a little bit about how welcome the G20 declaration is. And I want to sort of turn back to Patrick. Obviously, Patrick, you work for a developed countries ministry, development agency. Without wanting you to spill kind of state secrets, it'd be helpful just to give us a sense of how tough the environment is at the moment, and whether you think things like the G20 declaration can help with the sort of making the internal arguments that air quality is a good investment.
Yeah, many thanks for the question. Yeah, I think I can be rather open and honest here. So yes, as you know, we have all development agencies have been really hit either by severe spending cuts or even by disintegration, right? So, I mean, we've worked a lot with USAID colleagues in Southeast Asia, and a lot of these programs have just stopped now. And I guess, I mean, I should be as well fair and say that the ODA budget of Germany is still rather high. I think it's among the three highest globally. But yes, we can feel the pressure. We can feel as well the competition of different topics, so to speak. And we are at the moment in a stage, I would say, where we adapt to this and as well adapt to it in terms of air quality management funding and projects. And I guess there are a few things we should mention probably that can be done, right? So the co-benefits approach, again, is something I would like to stress here, because that is really often attracting funds as well from different departments or different ministries. So looking into joint funding from different ministries, I think is an important point to make. We already heard about the private sector engagement. I think, again, this is something we are looking into at the moment as well, If you look, for example, into public-private partnerships, market-based approaches around CSR, for example, there are some global companies who have a good base, and some of our partnering countries who are in the position and are as well willing to invest into air quality management, to really show as well their engagement and their acknowledgement of the problem and their contribution as well to the problem. So this is something to stress and to look into. I should as well mention that there are often low-cost solutions we might not have always on our minds, right? So, and some of them are really linked to what we just heard as well, to public ownership, for example. If you look into citizen science approaches around low-cost sensors, for example, these are rather powerful. They are, in terms of monitoring, interesting, but they are even more interesting, I would argue, in terms of creating ownership of a problem, and I guess because of that, quite attractive as well to implement in projects. And then I should as well mention that regulatory approaches around law enforcement, for example, should be as well looked into much more than in the past. If you look, for example, into the polluter pays principle, this could be a kind of tax, for example, that could fund some air quality management measures, and often, in most cases, the laws are there, but they are just not enforced. So this is something to look into. And then two more points quickly. Digital tools, I think, are very important. If you look, for example, into monitoring, satellite data are often available for free even, and really complement ground-based data, monitoring data quite well. And I guess the last point, and this is something we're really looking into at the moment, is to check to what extent ongoing programs could look into air quality aspects. So are there programs that are not focusing on air quality management at the moment, but that definitely have a benefit for air quality? So just to give one example, maybe we have a large program on methane mitigation in the rice sector in the Greater Mekong subregion, mainly Thailand. And there, of course, by reducing methane emissions from rice cultivation, you have as well a positive effect on ozone formation, right? And hence as well on human health, on agricultural productivity, and so on. So, in this narrative, that this project is as well contributing to better air quality, that hasn't been picked up yet. So there are often projects that could definitely be linked to air quality management approaches, and we are really screening at the moment ongoing projects to check to what extent we can leverage these co-benefits. And I think
Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. We don't have a lot of time left, but that was really, really interesting points there, and particularly that one around kind of leveraging the air quality co-benefits of work on methane, for instance, for public health, and the connections there because of the creation of ozone, which is something the Clean Air Fund is going to be doing some more work on. So it's interesting to hear you to say that. I want us to have time to come back quickly to everybody before we finish in 3 minutes' time. But I also want to turn to Sasha, because there's a question from Juliana Klakamp, who points to a sharp decline in global air quality funding from 22 to 23, and asking specifically what trends we see in the LAC region during that period. So I'm going to ask Sasha from CPI to come back in and really ask you just to be very quick, Sasha, maybe just 1 minute.
Yeah, absolutely. So we definitely do see that the LAC region is fairly low down in the regional rankings of receipt of air quality funding. So while they receive 10% of the total air quality funding from 2019 to 2023, only 2% of the outdoor air quality funding, so very few explicit air quality funding programs in that region. Looking specifically at countries, we don't see any LAC countries in the top 10 for outdoor air quality funding. But looking at the wider set of total air quality funding, which includes those co-benefit programs, we have Argentina, Costa Rica, and Brazil at places 8, 9, and 10. Argentina and Brazil have been in that top 10 before in last year's report, but Costa Rica is a new entrant into that top 10. So I think there were decreases from 2022 to 2023, but we are seeing some countries in that region slowly moving up into that top 10, but certainly not many, and still overall low percentages of the global funding. Back to you, Sean.
Thank you, Sasha. And I'm afraid we have run out of time. So always better, I think, to leave people wanting more than to have people dragging on. So I want to thank Patrick, Toro, Patience, and Genevieve for their contributions today. Thank Sasha and Rachel for the presentation. Thank you for bearing with us, with your patience as we dealt with some technical issues related to the fact we had a fire alarm in the middle of this. There should have been a link put in the chat for you all to sign up to the CAF newsletter. Please also go to our website to read the State of Global Air Quality Funding Report. We are trying to figure out how to share the slides with participants today. We don't think we can do it in the chat, but we'll try to do it by having a sort of register of participants and see if we can get the slides out to you that way. But this has been a fascinating conversation, really interesting to hear from the experts on how they view the challenges and how they're working practically to overcome them within their institutions, and also really inspiring to hear the high levels of ambition from our participants about the work that they have for their work in the air quality space. So whilst one could be depressed at the global picture of ODA, one can also be impressed at the commitment of some of the individuals and the institutions that we've got on the call who are trying to do as much as they can to reduce the harms caused by air pollution. Thank you so much, everybody, for attending, and I wish you well for the rest of your days, and we'll say goodbye and look forward to staying in touch. Thank you. Bye-bye.